Back to item 13.
Just give them a little bit of a...
Oh, yeah, we got that.
Hello.
Right.
Chinese zodiac.
You sit here drinking water and...
Oh, pelicans.
Right, thank you, councillors. Waiting for one or two. This is the adoption of the local board funding policy to allocate the capital funds. Remember, we talked about this at the governing body meeting, and we went out for limited consultation. And in keeping with asking local boards to attend, the local board chairs have decided that the three people in front of us, we have Shale, Kay and Andy, will come and speak to us about this. So comments from three first, I think, and then we will have the debate.
Charlie Brown.
Who wants to go first?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just perhaps explain. The local board chairs had a very limited amount of time to actually work through this formula and process together. And on Monday, it was decided that as we hadn't at that point been able to harmonise a final decision, that we would speak on the three different aspects of the policy as it affects the local boards. Andy will be speaking on a policy that has 90% population, 5% deprivation and 5% land. I will be speaking on a policy that has 100% population, and Shale will be speaking on the policy that is 95% population and 5% deprivation. So Andy's going to lead off first for us.
Thank you, Kay. I'm defending land. Look, it'd be fair to say that this was always going to be an interesting discussion amongst local boards, because local boards are elected to get the best for their communities, and so there was never ever going to be local boards sitting there agreeing wholeheartedly and as to one model. And so again, that's why we're here. So the land area thing is really the topic. The other day we did have a discussion. So as you can see from your resolutions, Franklin, Great Barrier and Waiheke were the only boards to support 95 and 5, and then a 2.3 and a 2.7. And that was based on the fact that we Franklin wanted to support Waiheke and Great Barrier, acknowledging the huge difficulty it is for those communities that are isolated from the main urban mass of Auckland to actually get anything done, and acknowledging the fact that it's extremely hard outside of local board funding for those communities. And so we wanted to see the likes of Great Barrier and Waiheke getting as much as they possibly could, acknowledging the fact that it's not just the local population that benefits from that funding. However, on Monday it became pretty clear that, and obviously when reading the recommendations from the staff, that 2.3 and 2.7 was probably a little bit a step too far, whilst we'd still love to see that. The three boards, acknowledge that we're probably more than likely to land at the 1 and 2, which is 100,000 and 200,000, and that seemed to be one of the things that most boards seemed to be okay with on Monday. So it comes down to that land. So you've either got two camps, I guess, of if you want land in there, or you want land not in there. And the resolutions that boards have passed And they're the only things that you guys can consider. I know that there's been lobbying done amongst the chairs to get people to change their mind. I know that boards have said, oh, we've now changed our mind, but the resolutions are what the boards have to stick with. Local board chairs, as far as I'm aware, can't just front up and say, oh, we've changed our mind. You either change that through a resolution or you stick with what you've got. If we went down that road of just changing our minds after a little bit of lobbying, the governance wouldn't be so flash. So the resolutions are quite clear that there was a number of boards who supported 5, 5 and 90 in the use of land. I guess it comes down to what is the, why should we have land? And I look at population first. Population is acknowledged as being the mainstay of our funding. It's used across council. Where the people are is where the money's spent. It's limited though in how that should or can be applied. Deprivation, I mean, yep, we acknowledge deprivation has a role to play, and for both population and deprivation, there is some evidential data, I guess, that can back up, and that's the difference between land. There's nothing evidential, as the staff have sort of alluded to in the report. There's nothing really there to base that on other than it's probably fair and reasonable. DHBs can actually get funding, access to funding. The government have worked out a formula that includes land, and some of the DHBs are able to access that. But for us to do that would take a huge amount of time, a large amount of money, and we actually just need to get on and make a decision. And I think that's the staff sort of talk about in the report. They talk about land being less able to be justified, I guess, but I think their report is that it's fair and reasonable to acknowledge the isolation that occurs from the geographic spread that is Auckland. And Auckland was created to include rural areas and along with urban areas, and you'll never get equity in Auckland, but you can get fairness and you can get reasonableness. So we want to just talk about, when you look at there's been a new, I understand there's been it's been circulated, a new sort of proposition which came out of the discussion on Monday, I think, which was 5% deprivation, 95% population with 1 and 2%. So if you look at the comparisons of what that means when comparing it to the proposal here or from the staff, the average across the boards that are likely to gain from the removal of land is $22,000 a year. The minimum's 11, the maximum's 34, I think. 36. 11 to 36,000. If you remove land, the impact on the rural boards, Rodney loses $228,000. A lot of talk today about public toilets. That delivers a public toilet. Franklin loses $109,000 and Waitakere loses 16. So if you look at places like Puhoi, Piha, Muriwai, Matakana, Waitakere Ranges, Hunua Ranges, Whitu, Oriri Point, Maraetai, what have they got in common? That's where the urban population of Auckland chooses to have either batches, as my friend Shale does at Oriri. That's where they choose to have their batches. It's where they choose to recreate. It's where they choose to cycle. It's where they choose to come to the beaches on the weekends and in the holidays.
Drink alcohol.
And it is where the populations increase by thousands. Same with, Waiheke and GBI, and I forgot to mention, they are subject to huge migratory population increases of holiday seekers and weekenders. Those people come to those areas with expectations of having public toilets, of having parks with facilities in them. Those things do not get delivered by regional, the funding that is available through the capital funding that local boards get. The new CapEx Franklin gets in the 16-17 year for new projects is a big fat zero outside of growth funding and for two legacy projects that are coming through at the end of their 10-year cycle. Take those out, 0. So we can't put in new toilets. So I'll give you the story of Oriri Point. When we came into being, they had 2 public toilets. They were badly placed, they weren't adjacent to the beach, they were small, they couldn't cope, they were getting cleaned and emptied because they worked on a tank 4 times a day because there's thousands of people in the summer coming to Oriri Point in the weekends. So the only way we could adjust that was through the capital fund that we had as a local board, because we couldn't get it across the line. We had to use our CapEx to build 2 toilets down the beach at Oriri Point to stop the urban visitors, with the visitors from elsewhere in Auckland, crapping in our bushes and on the beach and in the water. And that's the sort of thing that the little local boards get to use their CapEx on. We couldn't get it across the line. And, you know, Brenda would chew your ear off, as she's so good at doing, about things in Rodney and the same sort of stuff. Izzy would tell you the same stories. Paul and Sharon would tell you the same stories from Waiheke. So, you know, I'm sure we're going to hear that, look, communities can fundraise for things, you know. Why the hell should a community fundraise for a public toilet? Where can they get private funding for to do that? Or are we expecting those communities to have a sausage sizzle to provide public toilets for visitors, you know? So it's not about equity, it's not about fairness. This is about you as governing body showing that you have your regional hat on, doing what is right for the region, and not, you know, based on where you're elected from, to wear your regional hat, to figure out that some of those isolated communities are not able to be getting any funding at all for little things, and that some of the very little things that are huge in those communities that we are able to provide for. Outside of the urban mass, we get very little funding, and, you know, the closer you are to the centre, the better you get funded through the capital and the regionalisation, or the regional funds, CCO spending, etc., etc. So we are urging you to read the resolutions and see what boards have resolved on formally, and to provide the isolated communities of Auckland a fair enough dig at getting some stuff and showing that they are valued as Aucklanders as much as the people who live closer to the city. So I urge you to adopt the recommendations that are included in your report, and to accept what I think is a pretty fair report. You're not going to upset any public, because one person submitted and all their submission was cut some money by getting rid of local boards. Thank you, Madam
Thank you,
Chair.
Andrew. Andy? Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is that adequate? Yep. Is it working? Firstly, I'd just like to say that there are 12 local boards who absolutely support Great Barrier Island on 1% and Waitakere for 2% as a guaranteed fund, and that is above all 3 of the base formulas at this stage. And definitely we have a majority of local boards who have indicated in that direction. That is exactly the same, of course, as the Auckland Transport Roads formula, and it's been funding the islands also for quite some time. I do also understand that Great Barrier also has some SLIPS funding as well, so they have a little bit extra that they can work with. I'd just like to point out from an accounting point of view that there are 2 separate types of actual expenditure. One is CapEx, and that's our debt-funded expenditure, and it's and the other, of course, is OPEX, which is our rates-funded expenditure. And if we in the future are going to start to consider community-led development, we need to think and realise that it's really important for us to have CapEx so that we can actually seed fund a number of projects and get them off the ground, and having an adequate capex fund is very important. Population clearly shows that it is the most sound formula that we should really be using, and if Madam Chair would agree, I would actually like to give you a chart which actually shows all three of the formulas that you've got before you, population, deprivation, and the land value one, along with Waiheke and Great Barrier getting a 1% and 2%. And I've highlighted them showing where local boards sit to their most advantaged and their most disadvantaged, if you will agree to that. The disadvantaged area is showing in red on the numbers, and it is showing on green in the advantaged areas for each local board, and there's a gap in between because there's the three formulas. Well, land area, we also believe, is very important to be factored into operational funding as opposed to capital. Operational funding is about everyday expenditure. It's about getting through and out throughout your local board area. It's about servicing everybody on a regular basis, and as such, we acknowledge, and all the local boards acknowledge, that operational funding absolutely needed to have a factor in it for land value because it is difficult to get around. My staff could spend half an hour getting somewhere, whereas Andy's staff could spend 2 hours getting there to do a similar job for a similar group of people in his area. So when you look at this chart, it only applies to actually CAPEX, but it has a similar weighting actually in the OPEX area, but it's necessary to meet the general operational costs, and I think most local boards were quite happy with that when it went through originally. However, when it comes down to actually needing assets for people to use, that really comes down to the population needs to be your biggest factor. And having said that, and we've talked quite a bit about it on Monday, I've had a lot of chairs come to me. I've had 6 chairs actually give me emails changing their position if they voted again tomorrow. If it was returned to the local boards for another vote, they would change their position. And they would put their support to, 3 of them are currently sitting in the population column as a vote at the moment. And the other 3 local boards are sitting in the land, and they all are putting them into the deprivation 5% with no land column, because the weighting on land skews this too much. And so I'd urge you to take a look at that now that you've got it. You can see quite clearly that there is a very large majority of boards in the red column under the land value that's their lowest option. The others are spread between population and population and deprivation, so it's a mixture. And if you were to consider what might happen in a month's time with another vote on boards, you would be probably looking at a weighting of 2 pushing strongly for the population, 12 saying that they want a factor of deprivation included to be fair, and 5 saying they wanted land. And there's some that didn't actually communicate with me. So that gives you and that's when they've had a chance to reflect on it, think about it, and take it forward. We had a lot of confusion when we first had the formulas, because some of the formulas come through without any weightings for the islands in it, and they were just pure formulas. We also had Waiheke and Great Barrier vote in 2 places. They voted for their percentages that they were keen for, and they also voted for land. So it tended to skew the results. So I'd urge you to give some thought to that, and I know that Shale will pick it up now and talk about the split of the 95-5, which tends to be where most boards are landing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just the challenge of this process where local boards generally, where they can, where formulas and policies are directly impacting on only local boards. Our endeavour is to reach a position. Unfortunately, the process we adopted here was decisions report were taken to each local board, and the boards themselves never collectively got together to see whether they could reach common position, which we could come to the governing body to, to present, if not as a consensus, then certainly as a position where most were comfortable with that didn't disadvantage too many. So the challenge we have now is local boards took positions, and clearly Andy is quite correct in saying the formal positions before you are the resolved position. However, if you want to look at that, 11 out of the 21 boards didn't support land as a proposal. So on anyone's calculation, even on numbers, that is not a majority. But of course, that was only one of many different formulas. So my board, along with 5 others, a total of 6, took the position of that land shouldn't be a driving factor in the formula. So just to remind, officers of